The number of priests who perform exorcisms is on the rise. In 2005, there were 12 priests in the country trained in exorcism. Now there are more than 100. And while Catholic exorcisms are extremely rare, they are still performed.
Being in my line of work and the things that I do, I was frightened. And all of a sudden, he changed.
Leisure says the boy became violent and was strapped down with 5-point leather restraints.
And he just came out of those and flipped on his back like it was nothing. That is impossible.
The Catholic Church says common signs of possession are speaking unknown languages, demonstrating unnatural strength, elevated perception and knowledge of things they should not know, and resisting anything sacred.
At one point, his eyes turned black.
The manifestations can be anything from eyes turning black, eyes rolled in the back of the head, foaming at the mouth, bodily contortions.
Father Vincent Lambert is the appointed exorcist for the Indianapolis Archdiocese. He trained in Rome for 3 months and has participated in 40 exorcisms.
In today's world, faith seems to be in decline. There may be more people that are opening themselves up to the reality of evil.
In order to know if an exorcism needs to be performed, Catholic priests have to ask a series of questions and follow certain protocols.
Exorcists are trained to be skeptics. I should be the last one to believe that a person is really up against the forces of evil.
They take into consideration mental health, the side effects of any medication the person may be on, and if they have an obsession with the topic of evil.
I think a lot of it has to do with some of the programs on TV. They do kind of push it over the edge a bit.
Father Lambert says an exorcism is always about a battle of faith.
As an exorcist, I can present what the church believes, but then it's up for people, it's up to them to decide what they do with that.
Exorcisms are on the rise in the United States, and those trained to perform these rituals are rising to meet that need. Let's bring someone in who has performed an exorcism, Archbishop Salvatore Corleone of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. You know, there's been an increased demand for exorcisms over the last decade or so. An exorcist in 2018 told The Atlantic he got 1,700 requests by email and by phone. Another new report says the number of exorcists has surged from about 50 in 2016 in the U.S. to now between 125 and even as high as 150 by estimates. Is this a sign of evil on the march, or is it godliness in retreat in America, or a combination of both in your view?
A combination of both and other things. I can confirm that increase. Before I came to San Francisco, I was the bishop in Oakland on the other side of the bay, on the east side of the bay, and I asked a young priest, I brought him into my office I asked him to be, we call it the vocation director, basically the recruiter for the archdiocese, to bring in more seminarians to become priests. But I knew I needed to appoint someone to this position to do deliverance ministry and exorcism. And during the course of a conversation, it became clear to me he would be a good man for that job. So I asked him on the spot to take that on. Well, that ended up taking up all of his time. There was such a great demand. So there is a rise. I think certainly a big part of it is a retreat from godliness. I find it curious that religion on the decline, we're supposedly turning to science for truth, but there seems to be an increased fascination with the occult. So there's kind of more of that fascination with it. People are more aware of it, so they're ready to conclude that it's a demonic possession. Most of the time it's not. But there's another factor involved here that the exorcists I've worked with inform me of. When there is an actual demonic possession, there's always been some kind of childhood trauma. They've suffered some kind of violence. Usually it's some kind of sexual violence, but there are also other types of violence. That opens the door to a demonic possession. And then if the individual becomes involved in the occult, all kinds of occult practices that are so common now, Ouija boards and tarot cards and seances and so forth, the door is wide open for demonic possession. So I think with the way our society is going, it's fertile ground for that.
How would you say the state of the spiritual battle has changed in the last 10 years? Because it seems like things have kind of accelerated. At least, or maybe I'm more attuned to it now than I've ever been in my life, but it just seems like we're living in some really weird times. And so, you're an exorcist, you deal with the supernatural all the time. Can you tell us, I mean, how has things changed?
Well, it's become very bad. I would say maybe the worst in history, for several reasons, you know, not the smallest of which being COVID closing all the churches. That was absolutely the worst possible thing we could have done, in terms of advancing the kingdom of God, right? So we're taking away the sacraments from the people. People are stuck home with idle time on their hands. The human beings, when they're idle, tend to do bad things. And then you just compound it with anxiety, fear, and stress. And those are also factors that cause people to do things they normally wouldn't do. So that was its whole mess all there. But the other thing is the social media that's fairly, you know, new to humanity in terms of the timeline of history of people. This is a new way to compound sin exponentially through the internet, through social media. And it's not just pornography. Pornography certainly is a big problem, and America is the #1 exporter of that. But, you know, when you think of Instagram, Instagram is really just selling envy. People go on there and they become very envious when they look at everybody else. Half the time, it's not even their real life. You know, they've doctored it up to make it look better than it is. Twitter is selling anger. People are very angry on Twitter. And then Facebook is just selling you. You know, you're just a commodity for them. So you look at all these things, also very bad. Now, just 50 years ago, people knew what a sin was. People knew what right and wrong was. People still committed sins, but they knew it was wrong. Today, the culture has shifted so much that we're calling sin, you know, just living a good life. We're putting sin on a pedestal. We pay good money to go to the movie theaters and watch other people sin, and we have no problem with it, by and large, as a culture. That's different. That's never been in the history of man, perhaps with the exception of maybe Sodom and Gomorrah and various other parts of history. But now it's mainstream. Sin has become mainstream, and nobody calls it a sin. That's except the rare few, you know, churches out there that are still holding fast to the 10 Commandments, which also have become very out of fashion for most people. So this is, when you compound all these things together, it's creating a real cesspool of a culture.
Every diocese is supposed to have an official exorcist, but not every diocese does, because, you know, some dioceses simply say, oh, well, I don't believe in that, so I'm not going to bother to, you know. I belong to the International Association of Exorcists. And the last time we had our international conference pre-COVID, the bishops of the Philippines, the exorcists of the Philippines were begging for help because the Bishops' Conference of Australia had completely suppressed the use of exorcists. And people from Australia were flying over to the Philippines asking for help. And the Philippine exorcists were being overwhelmed because they couldn't get the help they needed in Australia.
My goodness.
So that's, you know, that's what happens. So when bishops and cardinals fall into those traps, onto those mindsets, they've become, you know, under the demonic influence, whether they realize it or not, or whether they admit it or not.